My name is Eleanor Vance. I am 34 years old, and for most of my life, I have been translating the language of my family into something I could survive. They spoke in a dialect of conditional approval and transactional love, and I, a native speaker of earnestness, was always at a disadvantage. I am a data architect now, a builder of logical, elegant systems where every connection has a purpose and every rule is defined. It is a world away from the emotional chaos of my upbringing, a quiet rebellion I waged by creating order out of the abstract. I maintained a carefully curated distance from them, a fragile peace punctuated by obligatory holidays and tense family gatherings. Last Sunday, they summoned me to brunch at the Gilded Finch, a place that values aesthetics over authenticity much like my family itself. Between the clinking of silverware on artisanal plates and the polite murmur of Seattle's elite, my mother, Beatrice, leaned across the table, her smile as sharp and delicate as a shard of glass. "Honestly, Eleanor," she said, her voice a conspiratorial whisper meant to be overheard, "we're very patient with you. We try to include you, even when it's difficult." I felt the familiar, cold plummet in my stomach, the one I'd known since childhood. But this time, something else rose to meet it, a quiet, unshakable calm. I took a slow sip of my water, the condensation cool against my fingers, and offered her a small, genuine smile. That night, in the serene solitude of my Fremont apartment, I logged into the digital architecture of their lives, the one I had built and maintained for years. With methodical precision, I began to dismantle the access that had become my cage. I froze the family credit lines, initiated security protocols on their investment portfolios, and drafted an email to my lawyer about the Orcas Island cabin. It was not an act of revenge, but of liberation. A quiet declaration that I was finally, irrevocably, revoking my application for their approval. To understand why a single sentence could unravel a lifetime of carefully managed duty, you have to understand the geography of my childhood. We lived on Mercer Island, a verdant jewel floating in the middle of Lake Washington, a place where wealth was as abundant and assumed as the persistent drizzle. Our home was a sprawling modern masterpiece of glass and cedar, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out onto the water, but inside, the emotional climate was perpetually overcast. It was a four-bedroom gallery of my mother's ambitions, curated with expensive art and an atmosphere of profound emotional austerity. My bedroom, with its view of the perfectly manicured garden my mother supervised but never touched, was my refuge. I filled it with books, worlds I could enter and leave at will, where belonging was earned through character, not compliance. From a young age, I understood the family hierarchy. My father, Arthur, was the distant, brilliant patriarch who had built Arthur Vance Holdings from a small real estate venture into a commercial property empire. His love was expressed through provision, not presence. My mother, Beatrice, a former art gallery curator from a family of old, quiet money, dedicated her life to the art of social ascension. She chaired galas, hosted dinners where conversations were strategic maneuvers, and viewed her children as extensions of her personal brand. And then there was my brother, Leo, 2 years my senior. He was the sun around which our family orbited. He possessed a careless charm that people mistook for confidence, and my parents mistook for potential. My achievements were quiet, academic. I excelled in math and science, won state-level coding competitions, and graduated high school as valedictorian. These accomplishments were received with a distracted nod, like checking items off a list of expected maintenance. "Of course you did, Eleanor. You have the mind for it," my father would say, his eyes already returning to his tablet. Meanwhile, Leo's C+ average was celebrated as a triumph of effort, and his brief, uninspired tenure on the university rowing team was mythologized into an epic of athletic prowess. At my graduation ceremony, where I spoke about the future of technology, my mother was overheard complaining to a friend that my dress was a bit severe, while my father took a business call during my speech. Their praise was reserved for Leo, a constant stream of encouragement to water a plant that bore no fruit. "He just needs the right support," my mother would insist. "He feels things more deeply than you do." This narrative became the bedrock of our family. I was competent and therefore required no support, Leo was sensitive and therefore required all of it. The family cabin on Orcas Island was the centerpiece of our public-facing facade. A magnificent log-and-stone structure nestled in a cove, with its own private dock and sweeping views of the Salish Sea, it was the setting for our Christmas cards and the backdrop for stories of idyllic family life. In reality, those weekends were exercises in parallel solitude. My father would be on conference calls in his study, my mother planning her next charity auction on the phone, and Leo out on the speedboat with his friends. I would retreat to the small reading nook my grandmother, my father's mother, had insisted on building. It was the one space that felt like mine. In her will, she had left me a partial ownership stake in the cabin, with the explicit, legally binding stipulation that the reading nook, and its collection of her books, remain untouched for my lifetime use. It was the only time anyone in my family had ever carved out a space, literally and figuratively, just for me. My financial entanglement began, as most things did, with Leo. During my senior year at Stanford, where I'd gone on a full scholarship for computer science, he lost nearly $50,000 of our father's money in a disastrous foray into cryptocurrency trading. He had been swayed by hype and had done zero research. My father, furious but unwilling to admit his son's incompetence, turned to me. "Eleanor, you understand this digital nonsense. Keep an eye on things. Make sure he doesn't do anything stupid again." That vague directive metastasized. By my late 20s, I was the unpaid, unacknowledged chief technology and financial officer of the Vance family. I digitized their entire financial ecosystem, creating a seamless, secure network of trusts, investment accounts, and bill payment systems. I built it with the same precision I applied to my work at Ethelred Analytics, the ethical tech firm where I was now a lead data architect. The system was elegant, efficient, and so deeply integrated that only I understood all its redundancies and fail-safes. They relied on me for everything from resetting their Wi-Fi to executing complex stock trades, all while referring to my career as my little computer hobby. My own life in Fremont was a deliberate counterpoint to theirs. My two-bedroom condo, filled with reclaimed wood furniture, overflowing bookshelves, and the warm, genuine laughter of my chosen family friends like Maya, a fiercely brilliant doctor, and Ben, a gentle landscape architect, was my true north. Here, I was not the difficult, analytical daughter, I was just Eleanor. They saw my quiet nature not as a social deficiency, but as a sign of a rich inner life. Yet, I kept returning to the fold, drawn by a stubborn, foolish hope that one day they would see me. Each holiday, each birthday, each brunch was a fresh injury to a wound that never quite scarred over. I would manage their wealth, offer my expertise, and in return, receive the familiar, casual dismissals. "Eleanor is so wonderfully practical," my mother would tell her friends at a gallery opening, patting my arm. "We're so glad she found a career that suits her. Particular skills." The compliment was always a cage. The tension had been building for months before that final brunch. The invitation was a command, texted on a Tuesday, family brunch Sunday. The Gilded Finch. 11 a.m. Be there. I already knew there were problems brewing. While performing a routine security audit on the family accounts, I had noticed a disturbing pattern. Leo was making increasingly large, frequent withdrawals, all routed through online payment processors linked to high-stakes poker sites. The total was approaching $250,000 over 6 months. He was hiding it well, but the data told a story he couldn't conceal. At the same time, my mother had begun sending emails about refreshing the Orcas Island cabin. Her plans, designed by a celebrity interior decorator, included demolishing my grandmother's reading nook to create a wellness center with an infrared sauna. My objections, citing the legal terms of the will, were dismissed as sentimental and obstructionist. These were the undercurrents pulling me toward that Sunday morning. I prepared for it like a diplomat preparing for a hostile negotiation. I chose a simple but impeccably tailored navy blue dress, armor against my mother's inevitable sartorial critiques. I mentally rehearsed neutral conversational topics. I set boundaries in my mind, invisible lines they would inevitably try to cross. Sunday dawned with a soft, promising spring light that felt like a lie. I drove my practical Subaru Outback to the waterfront, where the gilded Finch occupied a prime piece of real estate, its vast windows designed for the performance of happiness. I arrived at precisely 11, only to be met with my mother's first volley. "Eleanor, darling. On time is late, you know." My family was already seated at a prominent table. Arthur, distinguished in a cashmere sweater, was already scrolling through market reports on his phone. Beatrice was a vision in cream linen and pearls, a portrait of effortless elegance that required immense effort. Leo looked pale and frayed beneath his designer polo shirt, his thumb twitching over his phone screen. "Mimosas for the table," Arthur declared to the waiter, not looking up. "And Eleanor will have a black coffee. The caffeine helps with her headaches." It was a fabrication I'd long stopped correcting. He'd invented it years ago to explain my abstinence around them, unwilling to accept the simpler truth that I needed my wits about me. "Actually," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "I'll have a sparkling water with lime, and a coffee." Beatrice sighed, a small, theatrical puff of air. Always so specific. The brunch unfolded like a carefully rehearsed play I'd seen too many times. My father asked about my projects at work, then interrupted my answer to talk about a new commercial development. My mother praised Leo effusively for landing a major tenant for one of their downtown properties, a deal I knew from the company's financials was on the verge of collapsing. Leo accepted the praise with a tight, unconvincing smile. "We're so looking forward to the cabin reveal party this summer," Beatrice announced, turning to me. "We've invited the editor of Pacific Coast Living. The new wellness center is going to be a key feature." "As I've mentioned," I said carefully, "the renovations you've planned violate the terms of Grandma Elise's will. The reading nook is legally protected." Arthur waved a dismissive hand, not looking up from his phone. "A legal footnote, Eleanor. Your grandmother was a sentimentalist. The space is impractical. It's time to modernize." "It's a dusty old corner full of books no one reads," Leo added, his voice strained. "We need functional space. Space for entertaining." "I read them," I said. "I use that space when I'm up there managing the property accounts." Leo seized the opening. "Speaking of which, I've been meaning to talk to you. I think I need a higher access level for business expenses. More flexibility." He needed larger, less traceable withdrawals to cover his gambling losses. Before I could formulate a response, our food arrived, a brief, welcome interruption. As the waiter set down my avocado toast, I saw my mother and father exchange a brief, meaningful glance. "A strategy had been decided, Eleanor," Beatrice began, her voice adopting the smooth, reasonable tone that always preceded an attack. "Your father and I have been talking about your role in the family's finances." Arthur finally set down his phone. "Your help has been appreciated, truly. But it's time for a more professional arrangement. Leo is taking a more active role, and we're bringing on a wealth manager from a top firm." It was a clumsy, transparent lie. They wanted me out of the system before I uncovered the full extent of Leo's disaster. They wanted to hide the problem, not solve it. "I see," I said, carefully cutting a piece of my toast. "Transferring the systems I built would be a complex process. The security architecture is layered." "You see, this is the problem," Beatrice said, her frustration bleeding through. "You always make things so complicated. It's as if you enjoy controlling everything." The injustice of the accusation was breathtaking. For years, I had held their world together with my unpaid, unacknowledged labor. The control was a burden they had placed on me, and now they were recasting it as a personality flaw. The conversation stalled, the tension thickening the air. I glanced at a nearby table, where a young family was laughing. The father was helping his small daughter with her pancakes, his attention fully on her. The sight caused a pang of longing so sharp it was almost a physical pain. My mother followed my gaze. "Some people are just naturally suited to family life," she remarked, the insinuation a perfectly aimed dart. It requires a certain emotional generosity. She then placed her napkin on the table, a signal that the final act was about to begin. She leaned forward, the diamonds on her ears catching the light. And then came the words, delivered with the placid smile of someone who believes they are speaking a simple, benevolent truth. Honestly, Eleanor, she said, her voice soft, we're very patient with you. We try to include you, even when it's difficult. Most families would have given up on someone so rigid. The bustling restaurant seemed to fade into a dull roar. The air in my lungs turned to ice. Difficult. Rigid. Someone to be given up on. My father's silence was his signature on her statement. Leo shifted uncomfortably, his guilt a fleeting shadow on his face. In that single, crystalline moment, a lifetime of slights and dismissals coalesced. Every forgotten birthday, every minimized achievement, every backhanded compliment. They didn't see me as a daughter or a sister. They saw me as a problem to be managed, a difficult asset whose utility was perhaps no longer worth the trouble. Set my water glass down with a quiet finality. The tremor in my hands had ceased. I looked directly at my mother, past the perfect makeup and the carefully constructed social armor, and saw her for what she was, a woman terrified of anything she couldn't control. Thank you, Mother, I said, my voice perfectly level. Thank you for clarifying. She blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. She had expected an argument, tears, a defensive outburst. My calm acceptance robbed her of her victory. Well, she stammered, I'm just being honest. Harmony is about everyone understanding their place. Yes, I agreed, holding her gaze. It is. The rest of the meal passed in a haze of polite fiction. Arthur discussed market volatility, using data from a report I had compiled for him the week before. Beatrice critiqued the decor. Leo kept checking his phone, his face growing paler with each glance. As we stood to leave, he pulled me aside. Can I borrow 20 grand? Just for a few days. A cash flow thing. His desperation was a raw, open wound. I'll have to look at the accounts, I said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. I already knew my answer. As I walked to my car, the gentle Seattle sun felt warm on my skin. The immense weight I had carried for my entire life, the weight of their expectations, their dismissals, their conditional love was still there, but it felt different. It no longer felt like my burden to carry. My mother's words, intended to wound, had instead been a key. If my inclusion was a matter of their patience, an act of charity for a difficult case, then I was finally free to decline the offer. The system wasn't broken, it was working exactly as designed. And I was done being one of its components. The drive from the waterfront back to my Fremont condo was an exercise in focused breathing. Inside the sanctuary of my own home, surrounded by the quiet affirmations of a life I had built for myself, the floodgates opened. It wasn't the dramatic, heaving sobs of cinematic grief, but a silent, steady stream of tears for the little girl who had tried so hard, for the young woman who had believed her worth was measured in her usefulness. I wept for the love I had craved and the acceptance that had never been on offer. After the tears subsided, a profound calm settled over me. Grief had washed the landscape clean, and now I could see the path forward. I went to my home office, the room where I had spent countless nights untangling their financial messes, and opened my laptop. This time, I was building my own system. A system of boundaries, began by logging into the master administrative portal for the Vance family holdings. The dashboard I had designed glowed on the screen, a complex web of interconnected assets. It was their digital kingdom, and I held all the keys. My father had valued convenience above all else, granting me sole administrator privileges years ago, never bothering to understand the power he was ceding. Methodically, I began a process of documentation, not destruction. I took screenshots, downloaded transaction histories, and created a secure, encrypted file containing every piece of data, account numbers, property deeds, trust agreements, and a complete record of Leo's increasingly frantic withdrawals from the online poker sites. I was creating a fortress of facts. The evidence was damning. Over the last year, Leo had funneled more than $250,000 from various family accounts into his gambling habit. My parents, in the same period, had spent nearly $1 million on luxuries, a new yacht, redecorating their home, a lavish trip to Tuscany, while simultaneously complaining about the modest, automated charitable donations I had set up in their name. And the Orcas Island cabin renovation was contracted for $1.2 million, a flagrant violation of both my grandmother's will and local permitting laws. With the evidence compiled, I opened a new document and outlined my plan. It was not emotional, it was architectural. I would deconstruct the system of dependence with the same logic I had used to build it. My first call was to Maya. "I need a lawyer," I said, my voice hoarse. "Someone who specializes in family law and financial disputes. Someone who eats bullies for breakfast." "I've got just the person," she said, her voice warm and steady. "Catherine Albright. She's brilliant, and she has a spine of pure steel. I'll send you her number." Next, I created a checklist. All credit lines. All investment accounts. All property management systems. The automatic bill pay infrastructures. For each, I noted my legal standing as administrator and the actions I could take. The terms of use my father had blithely agreed to gave me the authority to enact security freezes in the event of suspected unauthorized activity. Leo's gambling certainly qualified to by 10 p.m., my strategy was set. This wasn't about revenge, it was about consequences. I would no longer stand between them and the reality of their choices. I would simply step aside. At 11:30 p.m., I began. First, I changed the master passwords, locking everyone out but myself. Then, I placed a temporary security freeze on the main investment portfolio, citing unusual withdrawal patterns. Next, I went into the credit card accounts. I didn't cancel them, I simply disabled the automatic payment feature that drew from the family's main checking account. The balances would now come due, demanding manual payment and, with it, scrutiny. For the family's operational accounts, I left them active but removed the multi-million-dollar overdraft protection I had personally negotiated with the bank. The safety net was gone. Then, I addressed the cabin. I composed a formal email to my family's longtime attorney, with Catherine Albright CC'd, subject, "Urgent legal matter regarding Orcas Island property. Dear Mr. Davies, this email serves as formal notice that I, Eleanor Vance, co-owner of the property at address, do not consent to the currently planned renovations. As stipulated in the last will and testament of Elise Vance, the library and its contents are to remain intact for my lifetime use. The current plans, which include the demolition of this space, are in direct violation of this legally binding provision. Please be advised that I have retained my own legal counsel, Ms. Catherine Albright, who will be in contact. I demand that all construction work cease immediately, pending a full legal review. Sincerely, Eleanor Vance." I attached a scanned copy of the relevant pages from my grandmother's will. The final step was an email to my parents and brother. It was short, factual, and devoid of the emotion that had defined our interactions for so long. Subject: change in financial management effective immediately. I am resigning from my role in managing the family's financial and digital systems. For security purposes during this transition, new access protocols have been implemented across all accounts. You will need to contact your respective financial institutions to establish new credentials. I have also taken legal steps to address the violation of my inheritance rights concerning the Orcas Island property. I will not be available for direct communication for the foreseeable future while I reevaluate our relationship. Eleanor. I hit send. Then, one by one, I logged out of every system. I shut down my laptop and powered off my phone. I walked into my living room and stood by the window, looking out at the glittering lights of the city. A profound quiet settled in my soul. The weight wasn't gone, but I was no longer carrying it. I had simply set it down. The feeling was not triumph, but a deep, resonant peace. It was the sound of a cage door swinging open. The next morning, the silence in my apartment was a stark contrast to the digital storm I knew was raging. I woke up feeling a strange combination of lightness and apprehension. I made coffee, meditated for 10 minutes, and stretched, deliberately grounding myself in the quiet reality of my own life. At 9 a.m., I turned on my phone. 42 missed calls. 67 text messages. A flurry of notifications from my email. I didn't read a single one. My only outgoing call was to Catherine Albright's office. "I received your email last night," she said, her voice crisp and professional. "I've already reviewed the will. Your position on the cabin is ironclad." "What's your goal here, Eleanor?" "Separation," I replied without hesitation. "A clean, legal, and financial separation. I want to protect my assets and my grandmother's wishes. And I want to be insulated from the fallout when my brother's financial problems come to light." "Good," she said. "Clarity is your greatest asset. Let's get to work." The day was a whirlwind of proactive defense. I met with Catherine, signed documents, and gave her a complete copy of the financial data I had compiled. By noon, she had filed for an emergency injunction to halt the cabin construction and sent formal notices to all the family's financial institutions, informing them of my resignation as administrator and advising them of the security protocols in place. Meanwhile, I took steps to secure my personal life. I changed the locks on my condo, installed a new security system, and notified my building's concierge not to allow any family members access. I went to a new bank and opened accounts, transferring the majority of my personal wealth, leaving only a small amount in any account that had ever been linked to a family transfer. This wasn't paranoia, it was strategy. I knew my family, and I knew their first move would be to try to exert financial pressure on me. By late afternoon, the tactics shifted from digital rage to direct confrontation. Leo called from a blocked number. I answered, putting the phone on speaker as Catherine had advised. "What the hell did you do?" he screamed, his voice cracking with panic. "My card was just declined. I have people I need to pay, Ellie. Serious people." "That sounds like a personal problem, Leo," I said calmly. "You did this. You locked the accounts. This is your fault. You need to fix it. Now." I resigned my position, as I stated in my email. "You'll have to speak to Dad about establishing new payment methods. Dad is going to kill me. He can't even get into the investment accounts. He's talking about suing you." "His lawyer can speak to my lawyer," I replied, my voice steady. "I have nothing more to say to you, Leo." I ended the call. Next came my mother's email, an attempt at emotional manipulation. Subject: "This is tearing your father apart, Eleanor. I don't know what's gotten into you, but this behavior is cruel and impulsive. Your father is beside himself with worry. We have always provided you with everything. For you to repay us with this. This betrayal is unthinkable. Whatever petty grievances you have, you need to put them aside for the good of the family. Call me immediately so we can undo this damage." I forwarded it to Catherine and my therapist, Dr. Ames, whom I'd called for an emergency session. "Note the language," Dr. Ames said later that day. "Betrayal, petty grievances. There's no acknowledgement of your feelings or their actions. She's framing your self-preservation as an attack on them. This is classic narcissistic behavior." For the next week, they threw everything at me. My father's lawyer sent threatening letters, which Catherine dismissed as posturing. My mother began calling my friends, trying to turn them into her allies. Maya called me after one such attempt. "Wow," she said. "Your mom is a piece of work. She told me you were having a severe mental health crisis and that I needed to convince you to come back to reality. I told her your reality seemed pretty damn healthy to me." Through it all, I remained silent, a wall of well-lawyered resolve. My life, for the first time, was free of their daily incursions. No more panicked calls for tech support, no more last-minute demands for financial reports, no more passive-aggressive comments about my life choices. The quiet was vast and liberating. I worked on my projects at Ethelred with a newfound focus. I had dinner with Ben and didn't once check my phone for a family-related fire I needed to put out. I was rediscovering the contours of my own life, a life that had been obscured for years by the long shadow of my family's needs. The first month after the brunch was a crucible. The initial shockwave of my actions gave way to a series of aftershocks that reconfigured the entire landscape of my family. Leo was the first casualty of the new reality. Without the endless, frictionless flow of family money, his house of cards collapsed. The serious people he owed money to were, as I suspected, connected to his high-stakes gambling. My father was forced to liquidate a significant stock portfolio, a loss to pay off over $150,000 in Leo's debts and prevent legal action. Leo had to sell his luxury condo in downtown Seattle and move into a small rental. His Tesla was repossessed. The charm that had always been his currency was worthless in the face of actual consequences, and why parents were not immune. The construction on the Orcas Island cabin was not only halted by the injunction, but the stop work order triggered a full review by the county permitting office. They uncovered numerous violations, resulting in significant fines and a lengthy, bureaucratic process to get the project back into compliance. My mother's social standing took a hit when her country club membership was temporarily suspended for a late payment, an unthinkable humiliation for her. My father, forced to engage directly with bankers and brokers for the first time in years, was confronted with the complexity of the systems I had managed effortlessly, experienced this all from a distance, through brief, factual updates from Catherine. I had changed my phone number and email address, creating an impenetrable digital fortress. My real life, however, was blooming in the newfound space. I was promoted at work, taking the lead on a groundbreaking project analyzing ethical bias in AI algorithms. I started hiking on weekends with Ben, exploring the Cascades and feeling the burn in my lungs, a clean, simple exertion that had nothing to do with emotional labor. About 3 months in, I received a package at my office. It was from my mother. Inside was a photo album filled with pictures from my childhood on a swing set, me at my 5th birthday party, a family portrait at the cabin. There was a handwritten note tucked inside. "Don't forget where you come from. We miss our daughter." It was a beautiful, poignant, and deeply manipulative gesture. It was an attempt to summon the ghost of my childhood obligation. I looked at the photos of the smiling little girl and felt a wave of sadness for her, for how long it had taken her to learn that she deserved more. I put the album in a box in my closet and did not reply. 6 months after the brunch, a different kind of communication arrived. A formal letter from a rehab facility, sent via Catherine's office. It was a letter from Leo, part of his family therapy program. It was stilted and formulaic, but within the therapeutic jargon, there was a flicker of something new. "I am writing to acknowledge the harm my actions have caused," he wrote. My addiction was enabled by a family system that avoided accountability. Your actions, while painful, forced a crisis that was necessary for my survival. I am not asking for your forgiveness, only to state the facts as I now understand them. It was the first honest thing my brother had ever said to me. After a long discussion with Dr. Ames, I agreed, through Catherine, to a single, mediated meeting with him, with a therapist present. He looked different. Thinner, tired, but with a clarity in his eyes I'd never seen before. He didn't make excuses. He talked about his illness, about the years of entitlement, about the gaping hole inside him he had tried to fill with the thrill of the win. "I was always jealous of you," he admitted, his voice quiet. "Not of your grades or your job. I was jealous that you had something that was yours. Something you built yourself. I never built anything. I was just given things." "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because for the first time, I want to build something too," he said. "A real life. And I know I can't do that without being honest about the foundation." It was not a resolution, but it was an opening. A crack of light in a door that had been sealed shut for decades. I didn't promise a relationship, but I left the possibility open for future, cautious contact, contingent on his continued recovery. My parents, however, remained trapped in their narrative. My father sent a proposal through his lawyer. He would agree to preserve the reading nook if I would resume advisory duties for their finances. My mother left a voicemail, her voice syrupy with false magnanimity. Now that Leo is getting the help he needs, it's time for the rest of us to heal. The family needs to be whole again. They still didn't get it. They saw the problem as Leo's addiction, not the systemic dysfunction that had nurtured it. They saw my boundaries as a temporary protest, not a permanent restructuring. Their definition of whole was a return to the old, broken system. A year after that fateful brunch, I sat on the deck of a small A-frame cabin I had just bought on the Hood Canal. The sale of my share of the Orcas Island Propertia buyout my parents had reluctantly offered to finally resolve the legal stalemate had funded it. It was modest, quiet, and entirely mine. The main room was lined with bookshelves I had already begun to fill. My phone buzzed with a text from Leo. It was a picture of a 1-year sobriety coin. "One day at a time," the message read. "Thanks to you." I smiled, a real, unburdened smile. A few minutes later, an email notification popped up from a society blog my mother followed. The headline was about a recent charity auction she had chaired. I clicked on it and saw a photo of my parents. They were smiling for the camera, the picture of grace and stability. The caption quoted my mother, "Through all of life's challenges, family is the one constant you can always rely on." I looked at their smiling, public faces, then out at the calm, gray waters of the canal. The two realities no longer felt contradictory. They were simply parallel truths. Theirs was a story told for an audience, built on a foundation of carefully maintained illusions. Mine was a quieter story, one I was finally writing for myself. The ending was still uncertain. There might be a path to some kind of reconciliation with my parents in the distant future, one built on a new ground of truth and respect. Or there might not. And for the first time in my life, I knew that either outcome would be okay. My mother had told me that they included me out of patience. What I had come to realize was that I had included them out of a desperate, unrequited hope. By finally letting go of that hope, I hadn't lost a family. I had gained myself. The water lapped gently against the shore, a steady, peaceful rhythm. The air was cool and clean. And in the profound quiet, I could finally hear my own voice, clear and strong, telling me I was home.